In lesson 1.7, we're going to answer the question, did LeBron James choke in the playoffs? And in this section, we're going to cover the four-step statistical process that you'll use in this chapter and throughout the course. And you'll be practicing this four-step process in your first investigation when you finish chapter 1. So there are kind of four steps to the statistical process that we're going to use, and we'll cover those in general in this chapter, and then going forward, we'll kind of formalize those steps as we move through the course. Step number 1 is to formulate a question. Step number 2 is to collect your data. Step 3 is to analyze that data. And step number 4 is to make a conclusion. This is very similar to what happens in the American justice system. So when a defendant goes to trial, we start by formulating a question about their innocence or their guilt. And a lot of times we make a claim about that. And generally we start off with the assumption that that person is innocent. And that's the claim that we are assuming is true. Then the prosecutor collects some data and presents that to the jury. The jury then analyzes that data before they make their conclusion. And the jury is looking for strong evidence against the claim that the defendant is innocent. So in the American justice system, again, when a defendant goes to trial, we assume that they are innocent unless we have enough evidence to claim that they are guilty. And we're going to kind of use that same idea as we go through the statistical process. So we're going to be looking today at the example of the 2007-2008 regular season and the playoffs for LeBron James. So during the regular season, LeBron James made 113 of the 359 three-point shots he attempted. In the playoffs, however, he only made 18 of the 70 three-point shots he attempted. And this led sports analysts to maybe think that LeBron choked during the playoffs because his performance there didn't really seem to live up to his performance during the regular season. Well, asking if LeBron choked isn't really a formal way of writing a question in statistics. So what we're going to do when we formulate our question is kind of write it in the same terms that we have been using throughout this course. So we're going to say, did LeBron James' ability to make a three-point shot decrease during the 2008 playoffs? Now we're going to assume that LeBron's ability to make a three-point shot stayed the same, meaning that whatever percentage of three-point shots he made in the regular season stayed the same in the playoffs. But maybe the difference was due just to random chance. And then what we're going to do is examine the data to see if we have good evidence that his ability decreased. So we'll assume that it stayed the same unless we have good evidence that it decreased. Step number 2 is to collect the data. And in the problem, we were told that during the regular season, he made 113 of his 359 shots. And we're going to turn that into a percent. And that means that he made 31.5% of his three-point shots. We also know that during the playoffs, he made 18 of his 70 shots, which is only 25.7%. Now we're going to display this with a graph so that we can make just kind of a quick preliminary answer to this question. And we're going to make a segmented bar graph. So on the vertical axis, I'll put the percentages. And you can do it the way that I did it here, or you can use decimals and just do 0.2, 0.4, and so on. On the horizontal scale, we'll separate our data into season, regular season, and playoffs with 1 bar for each. During the regular season, he made 31.5%. And because we're making a segmented bar graph, the rest of that bar will go up to 100%. And that represents the three-point shots that he missed during the regular season. For the playoffs, he made 25.7%. And that means that he missed the rest. So both bars total 100%. And then over to the side, I'm going to make a key. So the blue area represents the shots that he made, and the red represents the shots that he missed. Now, based on the percentages that we calculated in the graphs, the preliminary answer to this question is that it appears his ability did decrease in the playoffs. It wasn't a big decrease, but it still was about almost 6%. So that was a pretty decent drop off between the regular season and the playoffs. What we want to know, however, is how likely is it that this happened just by random chance? Or is this good evidence that there really was a decrease in his ability? So what we want to do is we want to simulate the playoffs and see what type of results we would expect from LeBron if his ability did, in fact, stay the same. Now, rather than using cards and spinners and things like that, or even a random digit table, we're going to use the applet to simulate this playoff situation, because the applet will give us the ability to try maybe 100 different playoffs and see what type of results we would expect. Now, you learned how to use the applet in a previous section in this chapter. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to fill in the numbers that we would use when we set up the applet. And then I've already given you a dot plot to use to help us analyze that result. So when I set up the applet, I put in his ability as 0.315 because we are assuming his ability stayed the same from the regular season to the playoffs. So if his ability in the regular season was 0.315, then his ability in the playoffs would still be 0.315. So we get this number from the regular season. Now remember, we're simulating the playoffs. So we want to see what would happen in the playoffs if his ability was going to stay the same. That means the number of attempts would be 70, because during the playoffs, he attempted 70 three-point shots. So this number comes from the playoffs. And then for number of performances, we're going to put in 100, because we want to do 100 different simulations of these 70 attempts, just so we can get a good idea of what would happen. So from the dot plot that's given in your notes, we can see that if his ability did in fact stay the same, most of the time we would expect him to make between maybe 20 and 24 or 25 three-point shots during the playoffs. That's what we would expect to happen, kind of what's toward the middle of the graph. As we get to the far ends of the graph, we're getting more into the range of what we would consider to be an unusual performance. So for example, if his ability was 0.315, it would be very rare for him to make 33 of his 70 attempts, right? Because then we're getting close to 50%, which is way above what we would expect to happen based on his ability. Likewise, if he only made 11 of the 70 attempts, well, now we're, getting down close to like 15%, and that's way below what we would expect to happen. So results on either ends of the graph would be strong evidence that his ability changed. Well, in our case, LeBron made 18, right? And 18 is right here, which is below what we would expect, but not far below. However, as we had results that were more in this direction, we would consider that to be stronger evidence that his ability decreased. Because if 18 is making us suspicious, him making fewer than that would be even stronger evidence. So what we want to do is see how likely is it that he would get 18 or less, because that's what we're going to consider to be our evidence in this case. And to figure out how likely that is, what we're going to do is we're going to count up the number of dots that are at 18 or below that. And the reason, again, that we're going below is because we think that he choked or his ability decreased. So we want to use the negative side of the graph. Not the negative, but the, going down toward decreasing values. So anyways, I have 100 dots there because I did 100 performances. And when I count up in that range, there are 17 dots there. So that means 17 out of 100, or 17% of the time, we would expect that result to happen. Now we can make our conclusion. We would say that if we assume LeBron's ability to make a three-point shot is 0.315 during the playoffs, like it was during the regular season, then the probability that he would only make 18 or less of his 73-point shots is 17%. We would then finish the conclusion by saying this is likely to happen just by random chance. And because it's likely to happen by random chance, that means there isn't good evidence that his ability to make a three-point shot decreased in the playoffs. Now, in statistics, we say that likely is anything that is 5% or greater. That's sort of the cutoff for what we use for likely versus not likely. So in this case, 17% is greater than 5. So we would say that's likely to happen. Now, if we go back to, again, let's look at the dot plot one more time. If LeBron only made 12 shots during the playoffs, then we would be counting up the dots that were in this range, right? And that only happens 1% of the time. That's unlikely to happen by random chance, and that would therefore be good evidence that his ability decreased during the playoffs. All right, so we already filled this in. Just one more thing to kind of, again, summarize the part about making conclusions, because this seems to be the most difficult part for students. If you look at your simulation and you get a result that happens 5% of the time or more, we say that that result is likely to happen by random chance, and there is not good evidence that the player's ability changed from one context to the next. If you get a result that happens less than 5% of the time, that means that is not likely to happen by random chance. Therefore, there is good evidence that his ability changed from one context to the next. Please do the assignment for section 1.7 in your homework packet.